Hey everybody, hope everyone's doing well tonight. We're going to jump in here with AP Language Synthesis Review. This is our second part of our synthesis unit. We'll still be in synthesis for the next few weeks. Tonight we are going to do a deep dive on how to get your introduction paragraph written, how to really effectively start your synthesis essay. So at this point in the year, it's February. A lot of teachers wait until around February to start an introduced synthesis. That's in part why I chose to do this unit while I'm doing it with you all through the month of February. So some of you have written a synthesis essay before. Some of you might be writing your first essay in the next few weeks. Let's talk tonight about how to effectively set your essay up above the rest, how to let your essay stand out in a field of essays on the same topic. Next week will probably be the most important session, so I hope you can make that. It will be where you make your money in the synthesis prompt, the body paragraphs. We'll be doing a deep dive of body paragraphs next week. We're going to be using the same prompt that we used last week and that we'll use through the coming month. So if you were with me last week, hopefully this is a very natural progression. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know either during or after the live session. I definitely want everyone who's taking part to feel really good about where you are in synthesis. And if you have any questions, please let me know so we can get those answered. So I've been an AP reader for the last few years. A lot of you know that if you've been with me throughout this year through Fiveable. The last created the synthesis essay. So I will talk very specifically tonight and next week about the trend that I'm seeing in order to be most successful. What I want to be really clear about this week and next week is I'm going to provide a template or a model paragraph that really gets the job done. It is not intended to be a formula, so please don't take it as such. What it really is intended to be is a mix of ingredients that the most successful synthesis essays have. So there are many ways in which you can organize your thoughts. I'm going to give you what I believe is the quickest and most efficient way to a 6, 7, 8, or 9 on the essay. So a lot of that depends on the quality of your explanation, but I will show you the ingredients that we really need to be effective. So let's go ahead and launch tonight our synthesis introduction. I call this begin your argument because I always want us to keep in mind that a synthesis essay is truly an argument essay. The only difference is you use sources for support. Now, just remember, if you were with me last week, we went over this, you need to synthesize at least 3 sources. You'll be provided 6 to 8 sources. You need at least 3 in your paper. I talked about this a little bit last week. Do not think that you need to include all of your provided sources. In fact, as an AP reader, when I see someone, this is just a trend, it's not a rule, right? But when I see students who use every single source, the trend that I've identified is those are often weaker essays. They get 4s or 5s, typically kind of anecdotally speaking. Again, you can use every source and get the best score possible, a 9. But the point that I want to make here is it's not about how many sources you use as long as you use the 3. It's about the quality of your explanation, the quality of your argument. All right, just a reminder, same time every Tuesday, we are still in synthesis. All right, I'm going to do a quick overview, especially for anyone who was not with me last week. Last week we took a while going through this, so if you're able to watch the replays through Fiveable Plus, always a good thing to go back to. But let me do a quick version of this tonight. So the synthesis essay explanations. Again, it's very argument central. I really want to make sure this is clear. A lot of my students every year ask me, because they're in AP US History, oh, this is like our DBQ. And all I want to tell them is there are absolutely some similarities here between a DBQ and a synthesis essay. But the synthesis essay, the driving factor and the driving difference between the 2 types of essays is it is your argument. It doesn't matter what the answer is. Just like an argument essay, it matters how you develop logic and concrete evidence to support your points. So your points are the clear claims. every topic sentence in a body paragraph should be a clear claim. So we'll be really unpacking that next week. Again, citing at least 3 sources. I think the sweet spot's about 4. So you're doing above the minimum, but you're not trying to force in sources that A, you don't have time for, because you can't do everything well in 40 minutes, and B, definitely don't talk about a source if you're not sure how to use it, right? Because it's going to happen, especially in those visual graphics that you'll be seeing in your classes when you do practice synthesis essays. A lot of students struggle with like how to effectively use the visual image if there's one provided. So only talk about the synthesis sources that you're most comfortable with and the ones that actually fit nicely into your argument. All right, again, we'll talk about this next week, but if you can make connections between sources, that's what synthesis is all about. So I recommend, although it's just a recommendation, it's not a hard and fast rule, that for every body paragraph that you write, you have at least 2 different sources cited. So not source A twice, but source A and then source B, for example. And then 5, let's talk about here for a minute. We'll talk again, a lot of this is body paragraph stuff because a lot of this, you earn your score really through your body paragraphs. So we'll talk a lot more thoroughly next week about a lot of this. But number 5, you may connect your own background knowledge. Absolutely. And so, in fact, some of the best essays, the 8s and 9s, the very rare bunch, include your own background knowledge and experience. Just be cautious there. Don't let it take over the essay. Let your background knowledge be synthesized and integrated into the sources that you're citing. So again, we'll talk about that more practically next week. Excuse me. So a note on scoring. This is a trend, and this pretty much is a hard and fast rule. There are 2 ways which automatically will cap you at a 4 and often will have you score lower than a 4 on that 1 to 9 scale. So again, 5 is kind of the threshold. You got to get 5s across the board and a little over 50% on multiple choice to track for the lowest 3 possible. And 3 is a qualifying score for a lot of colleges. So that's a good baseline score for a lot of us. Again, if you want to shoot for a 4 or 5, you've got to be higher than 5s on the essays. But 4s are not good enough for a qualifying score. So that's why we're talking about there's a pretty big gap between a 4 and a 5 and a 5 to a 6. There's some pretty big things that you need to be doing to get a 6 that 4s do not do. So the first thing is, if you don't synthesize 3 sources, you will not get higher than a 4. So this is very rare. I grade over 1,000 synthesis essays for the 7 scoring days every June when I'm on synthesis. Of those, let's just talk about last year. There was 1 student out of about 1,100 essays that I graded that was dinged for not using 3 sources. The point of me telling you that is that almost everyone in the country and in the world who's taking this exam is doing it the right way when it comes to citing 3 sources. Like I said, the bigger problem that I saw didn't cap them at a 4, but it often held them down when they tried to force every source. They ended up just summarizing the sources and not actually using them to argue their point. So that's the second point. If you don't keep your argument central, if you just slip into summary, or College Board calls it substitute a simpler task, which is often just summarizing the issue and not actually putting in your opinion, then you will be capped at a 4. Now, sometimes if you're just strictly summarizing, it'll be lower than a 4. So if you summarize in one body paragraph and then synthesize in another, that's still too much summary. That's going to cap you at a 4. If all you do is summarize, you're probably looking at a 1 or a 2 on that 1 to 9 scale. That is going to really mess up your overall score. Just remember that all 3 essays combine, they just average together, and that's 55% of your exam score. So you really can't afford anything less than a 4, right, at any given essay. So the goal is 5s or higher, and if you're shooting for a 4 or 5, you really want to be really fighting for those 7s and 8s. 9s are super rare, but obviously some students do earn them every year. It's very hard to earn a 9. Honestly, that's a tough score to get. Even some of the best writers, honestly, in any high school would struggle to get a 9 consistently because it depends on how you're doing that day in 40 minutes and how quickly you can process and outline your ideas, etc. Okay, really, guys, the whole last live session was about this. If you missed it, I always encourage you to go back and watch the replay. But I'm going to take 1 minute as a quick review before we launch into our intro tonight. How will you use your 15 minutes? There are 15 minutes of intended reading time. Now, you don't have to take all 15 minutes, but College Board recommends that you take 15 or very close to 15 minutes reading the synthesis sources and planning out your essay. So I'm assuming you're going to take 14 or 15 minutes here. So the first thing you do is carefully read the prompt page. Again, I unpacked that with you all last week. Then, and this obviously is where it takes the most time, steps 2 and 3, read and annotate every source. I talked last week about how to efficiently annotate the synthesis sources. If you've been with me through Fiveable, you know that I'm a big believer in annotations. It's not because I love annotations inherently, it's because I've seen how well they work for my students every single year. I again, last week went over how to effectively annotate. In a nutshell, underline phrases that you might end up quoting in a body paragraph later on, and jot down notes to yourself that are actually practical. So jot down notes that either say, I agree with this, I disagree with this, or if it's a synthesis prompt like the one that we look at this month together, that asks you to list factors or issues related to a certain topic, write down the issue or the factor. Again, I went through that very thoroughly. We went through 4 sources last week on the prompt that we're going to be with all of February. And then finally, everyone outlines differently. Obviously, this is not going to be a big, beautiful outline because we are under time constraints. But don't start your essay until you know these are my claims, so these are my ideas, these are my beliefs that I'm going to argue, and also these are the sources that I'm going to use as evidence. And a quick note, we talked about this last week, you can use, it's all about logic, so you can use a source that you disagree with to point out the flaws or the oversight of that source. So it doesn't have to be formulaic. This is my opinion, source A agrees with me, source C agrees with me, I'm moving on. It should be higher level thinking than that. So it could be source A agrees with me, and I'll talk about that for a little bit. And then source C actually is on the other side. Here's what source C says, but let's think about what is source C overlooking? Why is source C wrong while I am right? So that's, again, preview for next week when we really get into a deep dive of body paragraphs. Now, this is some new stuff, and we'll look at this very practically next week. I recommend, and again, there are many ways you can write this synthesis essay. This is what I think is the easiest path to a high score. Take 7 minutes. After that 15 minutes of reading time, you have 40 minutes left. Take 7 minutes to write your introduction paragraph. So really, our entire live session tonight, in real time, you're going to translate into 7 minutes of really quality writing. I recommend only having 2 body paragraphs. And I'll tell you next week more of my rationale for that. My students, when I've released them from the concept of a 5-paragraph essay, have traditionally scored higher when I've allowed them to choose to write 2 paragraphs versus, a lot of students always think you have to write 3. You can't just do 1 body paragraph effectively. I should take that back. You can, I've seen it done, but it's hard to do 1 body paragraph effectively. I recommend 2 for synthesis, because you'll see next week, synthesis body paragraphs inherently are going to be very lengthy if we have at least 2 sources with them. All right, 3 minutes to write a quick conclusion, but I do recommend doing so. Excuse me, and then a couple minutes to proofread and revise. I always recommend in synthesis, rhetorical analysis, and argument that you take a couple minutes to put your eyes on the text one more time before you move on. I don't think it's a good idea or reasonable to try to end 5 minutes early and that third essay I'm talking about with 5 minutes to spare on the exam and go back and have an effective reread. You might as well reread and revise while the synthesis essay is fresh. Think about it. If you write the synthesis essay first, which most people do because it appears first in your prompt packet and it launches you into the 15 minutes of reading time, recommended reading time. 80 minutes later, 40 minutes in analysis, 40 minutes in argument, it's going to be a little fuzzy, like the nuanced high-level thinking that you had in synthesis just 80 minutes before. So I recommend taking a minute, taking a couple minutes, proofread, revise, make sure this is the best quality writing you can do in 40 minutes, and then move on. So one more note on timing. Obviously, this is a very practical thing we have to deal with. Timing is not easy on this exam. I've said this in previous weeks. You've heard me say it if you've been with me. 99% of people who take this test will use every minute. You are automatically, by definition, at a disadvantage if you end even a minute early. So use any free time that you have to proofread and revise. But most importantly, have a game plan of how you're going to spend every minute when you go in. Some of you might say, hey, I practiced a few times. I can do a really effective read through and outline of my synthesis essay in 13 minutes. And I can take 34 minutes instead of 40 to write a really quality synthesis essay. That opens up 5, 6, 7 minutes on rhetorical analysis, maybe, where I really could benefit from more time. Maybe 6, 7 minutes extra there would be the difference between a 5 and a 6 or a 6 and a 7. So just have an individual game plan. But the way that the math breaks down is 15 minutes of reading time for synthesis and then 40 minutes for each essay. Obviously, that's an average. Your proctor will not tell you stop synthesis, move on to rhetorical analysis. However, you should be very well aware when every 40 minutes is up. If you want to be on pace, you should be moving on to your next essay. One more thing here, I just want to emphasize, have your game plan in mind. You can only do that through practice rounds. It's really important if your teacher has done this at this point in the year. If they have not, advocate or practice on your own, writing 3 essays back to back to back that you have never seen before in 2 hours and 15 minutes. That's when you really find out, is your plan A working for you? Okay, quick note on organization before we launch into my model introduction paragraph tonight and the steps or the ingredients that we really need to be successful. So every single thing that I do through Fiveable, I want to be really practical. So I give you very concrete pieces of writing. They will get the job done. It doesn't mean they're the best paragraphs you've ever read. In fact, I've read student writing that is better than the ones that I provide. And I do that intentionally because I want what I do to be very practical and tangible and doable. With that said, I'm just emphasizing this a lot tonight. There's no right way to organize. So you might read someone who does a synthesis introduction different than me, different than I show you tonight, and it might just be as effective. So again, let's get the components in place. The organization, there's definitely wiggle room here. Again, I just want to be very clear. I will show you a really good path, or a really effective path to a great synthesis score between this week and next week. However, it's all about how you execute. So it's not about following a formula by any means. If College Board senses, oh, you are super rote, you are super into a formula, your reader will actually dock you for that. So inherently, you want to just be authentically writing in your voice, and you want to be naturally and thoughtfully organizing your ideas. Again, here's how I would organize, though. You have to have these ingredients. You have to have an introduction, 2 to 3 body paragraphs. Again, I recommend 2 actually, and then a conclusion. Guys, I've seen great essays with 1 body paragraph, but they're super rare. I've seen great essays with 4 body paragraphs, but honestly, they're super rare too. When you have 4 body paragraphs, it's hard to fully and adequately develop all 4 within the allotted time. Now, a note on conclusion. I'll actually do a live session on synthesis conclusions, kind of wrapping up our unit. But conclusions are very controversial. Some teachers say don't even worry about them. And the reason they say that is because they do not have like a super huge impact on your score. However, that's why I only ask you to take 3 minutes on them. I think conclusions are effective because they indicate to your reader, I've finished and I've come full circle. I've really closed out and fleshed out my argument. So if you can have an effective conclusion, I'll show you that in a few weeks. That's the goal. But again, only spending a few minutes on it. We're spending, again, the vast majority of our time in the body paragraphs. All right. Synthesis is all about identifying how sources work together. The weakest essays that I typically read, outside of ones that merely summarize, are organized through sources. Do not do this in your thesis statement. So we'll look at a thesis tonight. This is a bad example of a thesis. I believe blah, blah, blah because, or as shown in source A, D, and E. Don't even mention your sources in your thesis. That's not your claim. That's not what you're proving. You're using the sources to back up your claims. So again, it's a very bad claim or very low-level topic sentence for a body paragraph to say, source A shows blah, blah, blah. Don't be driven and pigeonholed by a source. I recommend using multiple sources to prove your point. That's what synthesis is all about. I'm going to take 3 minutes here, doing a quick review of the prompt that we're in, especially if you're jumping in without having watched the replay of the live session from last week. This is the prompt that we're going to be in for tonight and also next week. So in the real deal, take your time to read the prompt page. There will always be 4 components. I will do a very quick read through of them tonight with us. Component 1 will be every time there will be background information provided. That's just to get you a little bit more comfortable in the topic. College Board tries to find a topic that you can clearly and quickly develop a position on. However, they are hoping that you do not have a very strong opinion about this. So let's go ahead and read their topic here. The need to memorialize events or people is complex. In some cases, monuments honor moments of great achievement, while in other cases, monuments pay homage to deep sacrifice. A monument's size, location, and materials are all considerations in planning and creating a memorial to the past. Second component will always be the prompt. It is possible that they shift the order of the components around, but this is the most common order. Background knowledge, prompt, etc. Here's the prompt. I always have my students underline it, so I underlined it for you. So actually find the prompt itself. So it says, read the following 7 sources carefully, including the introductory information for each source. Then in a well-organized essay that synthesizes at least 3 of the sources for support, examine the factors a group or agency should consider in memorializing an event or person and in creating a monument. And I call these generic synthesis directions. It'll be a separate paragraph, usually 3rd paragraph that they provide. Always read it, like do a speed read of it because you should know what it's going to say. It's almost word for word every year, but let's read it. Nothing's new. This is what I've been talking about tonight. Make sure your argument is central. Use the sources to illustrate and support your reasoning. Avoid merely summarizing the sources. Indicate clearly which sources you are drawing from, whether through direct quotation, paraphrase, or summary. You may cite the sources as source A, source B, etc., or by using the descriptions in parentheses. I will do a pretty thorough live session in 2 weeks about how to effectively embed quotations, paraphrases, and summaries, and how to effectively and correctly cite these sources. I'll get to the nuance of punctuation grammar. That is helpful not only for this essay, but also following citation conventions as you get into college or do any papers in high school, research papers, etc. So in 2 weeks, after next week's body paragraph live session, that will be our focus. And lastly, I wouldn't take too long looking at this. I'd just glance at it. They will give you the list of sources. Again, you can cite either source A or what's in the parentheses. It's usually the author's last name, unless there is no author's last name. If it's like a kind of a company or just a photo of some sort. Either way is acceptable, but in 2 weeks, when I go over citation expectations, I will give you some advice on how to choose between which type of citation. Because I think the best writers generally choose deliberately based on the flow of their writing. Okay, last week we talked about this, so I'll do this very quickly. Before you flip the prompt page over, in other words, before you start reading source A, jot down your own ideas about the topic. So this topic asks us to generate factors and then narrow it down and say what are the most important factors. So these are the 5 that I came up with very quickly before reading the sources. So important factors in order to, or I should say that agencies should think about when considering what and who to memorialize are cost, location, public perception, the environmental, and the economic impact. Now, let's say I've read through all the sources and I've annotated appropriately. I saw the most useful information on these three. So let's say these are my 3 body paragraphs: cost, location, public perception. Now I know I said I recommend doing 2. If I was to do 3, these would be the 3. If I was to do 2, I would just cut 1 and choose 2 of them. So environmental impact, economic impact, they work. But again, I'm figuring out what are the most important factors. Having the sources help me choose that based on how I can synthesize them into my own argument. All right, the function of a synthesis introduction. This is very similar to the function of an argumentative introduction. Very similar slide here than I did in the fall when we did this for argument essay. So first, your introduction sets the tone for the essay. Second, it clearly and effectively introduces the topic and also your position on the topic. That's clear. Don't just write some background knowledge. Make sure your position is clear. Obviously, you're going to do that at least in your thesis statement. Effective essays will not begin like every other essay. So I told you earlier tonight that I last June, graded 1,100 some synthesis essays. Most synthesis essays begin with a paraphrase or a summary of the background information that I'm showing you right now. I'd say 70% either summarize or paraphrase this information. That is a complete waste of time. It is better to just write a thesis and move on than to essentially plagiarize College Board's background knowledge. It's tempting because the students inherently know they have to put something there, but don't just copy from College Board. As an AP reader, we are looking for your thoughts, not College Board's thoughts. Same with the synthesis sources. I'm looking for your ideas, not the ideas of source A. So I need to make sure source A is just integrated into your idea. You're not just giving up a platform to source A and copying down source A's ideas. The same concept goes here for intro. Do not just paraphrase the background information. You have to bring additional information in from your own background experience, etc. We'll look at how to do that tonight. Again, if 70% of students did what I just said, if they just paraphrased or summarized the background information, 29% didn't have an effective intro or didn't even try to have an effective intro, I should say. They either just had a thesis or nothing at all. And then 1% had an effective introduction. So again, hey, if you're not shooting to be the top 1% here, maybe skip this really high level stuff and move on to the body paragraphs with me next week. But if you want to see what the best writing can look like, let's stick with it. All right, synthesis introductions don't. In your entire introduction paragraph, again, I've seen it done effectively, but I recommend do not cite the sources. Save the citations for your body paragraphs. Again, I've seen counter examples here. That's the beauty of AP language. There's no exact rules, so you can, as a great writer, break kind of my tradition, right, to do so more effectively. But the reason I put this on the don't do this slide is because most students who include the sources too early become too source heavy and don't rely enough on their own ideas. So I recommend, because 99% of students don't do it effectively, don't even try, don't even worry about putting sources in your intro. And then this is even more important, don't merely summarize or paraphrase the context that College Board provided. That is not impressive because it's not your thoughts. All right, we're going to jump in finally to step 1, 2, and 3. These are the 3, again, I call them ingredients, but this is what I've seen. This is the trend that I've identified through student writings, both in my classroom and AP reading experience that I've had. That is the most frequent or most common path to high scores. So step 1, provide your own context on the topic. I recommend 2 to 4 sentences here. Step 2, Use language of the prompt, and I'll show you what this looks like tangibly here in a minute, to build to your thesis. I recommend this is 1 to 3 sentences. So between steps 1, 2 to 4 sentences, and 2, 1 to 3 sentences, we're looking at 3 to 7 sentences. So naturally, anyone who's writing in 7, 8 sentence intro, that's effective. I'm only saying do that if you can still write a really effective intro in 6, 7 minutes. You can do these steps kind of at the minimum and just do this in 3 or 4 sentences and still be just fine. You're still going to set yourself apart from the vast majority of your colleagues or your peers. If you write 4 introduction sentences that are really purposeful, nuanced, and bringing in your own background knowledge, you will be doing something that the vast majority of AP language students are not doing. Don't paraphrase any part of the prompt. Don't even put it in 1 sentence. You can use keywords from the prompt page to signal an on-topic essay. What I'm saying here very, very clearly, I hope, is step 2 is not about paraphrasing the most important sentence of background or prompt page. It's about using a couple keywords. And again, I'll show you what I mean very tangibly here. Before I look at my own writing, the final step is, as you would expect, the most important step. That hasn't changed since middle school. The thesis statement is the most important sentence in your essay because it indicates to you and the reader, this is what my essay is all about. So it's important. Your money is not made by the thesis. Your money is made on how you develop your thesis. But you can't develop a thesis without a thesis. Thesis statement, I recommend putting it where it belongs. In college, most professors will still require it here or recommend it here. The last sentence of your introduction paragraph. There is no hard and fast rule on that. So the College Board is not going to deduct points if it is not there. However, AP readers are naturally going to look for it there, and they're going to wonder, oh no, where's the thesis if it's not there? And if you don't have a clear thesis throughout your essay, that is a problem. So they're going to reward you for what you do well. If your argument's clear without a thesis, you can still get a great score. It's just you're going to be doing yourselves favors. You're going to be doing your reader a favor. You want your reader to be on your side here, so you want your reader to know, absolutely, this student knows where he or she is headed. All right, again, in your thesis, I hope I made this clear earlier, don't mention sources. Give me your reasons and your ideas, not the sources that your ideas back up, right, or vice versa. Make sure your idea is completely and clearly articulated. All right, here's my final rule of the introduction. It is recommended, I've said this before, don't even reference your sources. Save that for your body paragraphs. Again, I'm going to focus on body paragraphs next week. I definitely hope you can come back for that live session next Tuesday night. Okay, let's look at my writing. Step 1, I recommended 2 to 4 sentences. Mine is exactly 4, so this is kind of on the lengthier end. In today's society, setting out to memorialize a person or event is not as easy as it once was. Throughout the last few years, it has become more and more common for advocacy groups to criticize a monument because of its one-sided look at history. Confederate statues, for example, once proudly representing their respective cities, are now being taken down at record rates. Gone are the days of greenlighting the majority of fully funded projects. I haven't mentioned a source yet. I'm just providing my own background knowledge. I'm going to go back a few slides, compare these 4 sentences to these 2 sentences. Mine are a lot more specific. Mine are fully pulled from my own experience and background knowledge, not relying on what College Board provided. This is way too generic to be really effective, right? A lot of students would say, there are many factors that need to be considered. It's very complex to create a monument. Size, location, and materials, these are all things to consider. I hope you see that this is way more thoughtful. This is actually me putting myself in my voice and my thoughts into the essay from the get-go, not just relying and leaning on College Board. If I'm leaning on College Board, it's because I don't have any ideas on my own. That's how your AP reader will look at it. Again, let me be clear. The introduction paragraph is not where you make the majority of your score, but it is very hard to score a 7, 8, or 9 without a decent introduction paragraph at worst, a great introduction paragraph at best. If you want to really shoot for those 8s and 9s, we do have to try to implement your own ideas and own context here. One quick note before I move to step 2. Every year I get students who tell me, I don't have enough background knowledge. So I'm going to just acknowledge, that's why I said pulling off 9s consistently is tough, because there might be a prompt in which, man, I'm thinking, and I can't think of anything like I was able to think of the Confederate statues that are coming down. If I don't have anything, do the best you can, but you will have to be a little bit vague. It will hold you back, but again, you can still get a great score through the body paragraphs. Still have a few sentences here, maybe won't be as specific as mine, that just, to the best of your ability, provide your own context and insight into the topic before launching into your thesis. One last word on that. I tell my students this a lot. I think that you have enough background knowledge. Like, I think most of you knew about the Confederate statues being taken down. The skill which you develop as you practice this, and that's why I recommend practice with new prompts, is accessing what background knowledge would fit perfectly here. And obviously doing that in a time setting is even more tough. That's why 8s and 9s are very hard to get, honestly. All right, step 2. This is, I call it the bridge between my context to the thesis statement, my ideas. Now, this was only one sentence, so I had a longer version of my step 1 context, but then I only had one sentence to bridge it, and that's all I needed here. Let's read. Rather, groups and agencies must carefully consider how the current generation and future generations will view the person or event being memorialized. Okay, so the phrase that I pulled was groups and agencies, and I also pulled the phrase person or event being memorialized. But if you go back to the prompt, you will see I did not plagiarize their thought. I'm just leaning in to answering the prompt. My idea here is clearly mine, must carefully consider how the current and future generations. That is my idea. Current generation, future generation, those things were not mentioned by College Board. So that's why I'm not plagiarizing, I'm not paraphrasing, I'm not summarizing the prompt page here. I'm just putting a couple key phrases out or key words out to indicate, here I go, I'm about to be hitting this thesis on the nose. Here's my thesis, it's long. This is exactly like an argument thesis. If you were to read this thesis, you would not, within isolation, you would not know if this was a synthesis thesis statement or an argumentative thesis statement. And that's by design. They should sound and act virtually the same, depending on the topic, of course. Okay, I recommend a while or an although x, comma, y. That's my formula for a thesis. So again, you've heard me all night say, to me clearly, this is not about a formula. But in terms of a thesis, I think that's a great, the ingredients we'll look at. What's the prompt? What are your ideas? I think while x, comma, y is a great way or a great order to put those ingredients. So let's read my thesis. While cost and location are unavoidable factors that must be considered when setting out to create a monument, the most significant factor in creating a monument that will stand for generations to come is societal perception, both in the present and in the future. Okay, so in my, hold on, let me find it. In my thesis statement, I have 3 main ideas: cost, location, societal perception. Again, that goes back to my slide earlier. The sources helped me narrow down to those 3 if I had just read the sources. Obviously, I'm cutting one of these 2, cost or location, if I'm cutting down to 2 body paragraphs, which is my recommendation actually. But this is by design. This is a high-level thesis statement. A weaker thesis statement, but still effective thesis statement, would list cost, location, and societal perception at the end. Now, the reason why this is higher level is I'm emphasizing what I'm saying is the most significant. So I would actually save this body paragraph for last to build up to it, with the caveat, I gotta make sure I have time to get there. So I might need to honestly combine cost and location into one body paragraph. That's another option. And have a second really fully developed body paragraph here. So again, there are many ways in which to organize, but it's all about how you use the sources and how you develop your argument. I want to talk about attention in a thesis statement. Again, I don't want to sound formulaic, actually. And honestly, this does not sound formulaic. What sounds formulaic is the factors are 1, 2, 3. The factors that are important are cost, location, and perception. That's more formulaic. So this is higher level, although the ingredients are still there. With that said, I recommend, and let me be clear here, there are two types of synthesis prompts. One that says evaluate and list the most important factors of this issue, such as what we're looking at this month. But there's another type of synthesis prompt that just asks you, like an argumentative prompt, take a position on the topic. So for that, go back to my argumentative introduction paragraph thesis. That's how I want it to sound. I don't want it to be listy, listy, listy. That's what I said that week, and that's what I'll say again. However, I can be a little more listy when I have to identify the most important factors, because naturally I'm going to develop a list of the most important factors. So I'm not going to spend a lot more time in that nuance tonight, but just really think about that as you're writing your thesis statement. Am I listing factors? Is the prompt asking me to list factors? Or if I'm taking a position, I don't want to just be listy, listy, listy. I want to have a more nuanced thesis statement. So again, I have in those 5able replays a really, what I hope is an effective walkthrough of that through an argumentative thesis statement. Okay, why is this an effective thesis statement? I've been talking about it, so I won't take too long on this slide. But the most important, guys, it's not source driven. I didn't mention source A, B, C, D, E, F, G. The argument is clear. And then why this sets apart, like why this is higher than a 6, because a 6 is clear, not source driven. A 6 on that 1 to 9 scale, I mean. Nuance exists here. Not all factors are weighted equally. That's what sets this thesis apart from the field. 1 and 2 are required to just be effective. This one is more effective than most. Okay, so we're actually getting close to the end here tonight. I'm not going to read this all to you, but this is what my introduction looks like. On the whole, like this is how it would flow. Notice, step 1 is where I make my money here. Step 1 is how I'm in the top 1%. I know that sounds extreme, but I'm telling you, most people, and maybe rightfully so, because body paragraphs are where I want you to spend most of your time. And that's probably where most people are spending most of their time in class, right? To be honest, I spend most of my time in class on body paragraphs for every type of essay. That's where we really develop skill, and that's where we get the most bang for our buck here. But for all of those reasons, and plus it's hard to pull off because it does require your own background knowledge, 99% of students every year are not writing effective introductions. They're writing mediocre ones that kind of get the job done, or worse. My context that I provided tonight sets myself up to stand out among a sea of mediocrity when it comes to introductions. About half of my essay, my introduction paragraph, was my own context. Keep that in mind. Now, if I, again, if I can't do this in 7 minutes, I can cut this a little bit. I can't cut my thesis at all. I don't want to do this first step without a bridge. So I can't really cut my bridge either. This is just 1 sentence. It's already pretty short. Again, your bridge should be about 1, 2, or 3 sentences. So I can cut this. Obviously, this is the bar. You could do even better. Like, I'm not saying this is a 9 even. I'm saying this is effective. This sets myself apart from the sea of essays. I can't cut my thesis. It's got to be this good, so I got to spend the time doing this right. Then I got to think, okay, what can I quickly and effectively include that is my own thought, not College Board's thought. So some final reminders, and then we will wrap up here tonight, guys. Sources are not necessary at all in your introduction. In fact, I recommend you don't include them. So that's the first reminder. Second reminder, and this is probably the most important, your argument must be clear. It must be clearly articulated. That comes out most clearly in your thesis statement. And then finally tonight, bring in your own background knowledge as much as you can, but as fast as you can. Don't rely on the prompt page. So that's it. Keep on coming back. We'll be here through 5able to really help you with your synthesis essays. I'm glad to see you all here in the live session. If you're watching on a replay, awesome. Next week, we'll be doing a deep dive of body paragraph. I really hope each and every one of you can come back next week for the body paragraphs. Spread the word that this is happening. This is a very useful, I hope, live session next week. In the meantime, if there's anything you definitely want me to cover, not just with synthesis, but with any part of AP, I can be flexible and meet the needs of our audience here. So always feel free to reach out on what you would like me to cover through Fiveable. But again, I'm glad that you were able to stick with the introduction live session tonight. And I'm really excited for the body paragraph one. I think that'll be a very useful one next week. All right, everybody, have a great night, and I will see you next Tuesday.